In my imagination, I wrote a letter to someone who saw the first Christmas, and I imagined that he wrote this back. Dear Dave, thank you for your letter and your interest in my story from that night. I love telling the story. It was a normal night in the hills. There were a group of us huddled around a fire. As shepherds, you learn how to have conversations and listen for the sound of nervous sheep at the same time. It was night, kind of dark, but the moon was so huge and the stars were so bright you could see the outline of everything. Way off in the distance, you could see the city on top of the hill. And if you listened really carefully, you could almost hear the echoes of laughter and celebration. We were temple shepherds, watching over the sheep that would be used in sacrifices. To you, it may be strange that we protected sheep so that they could be sacrificed, but it was an important job. Sometimes we weren't treated like we were important, but the priest demanded that you take really good care of their sheep. One of the sheep gave birth, and we quickly gathered it up and carefully wrapped it in cloths, and we set it in the feeding trough. And when they're first born, they're so fragile. You have to make sure that none of their bones are broken, and so you wrap it and you place it in the trough so that it can hear the sound of its mother's voice. There's such joy when a perfect lamb is brought before you. There's an awareness in the midst of that joy that that perfect lamb would be sacrificed so that the priest could proclaim freedom from sin. In a way, they were born to die. But on that night, some of us slept and some of us sang softly to keep the sheep calm. Some of us discussed politics or corruption, and some of us, like me, just stared into the vastness of the night, feeling completely insignificant. And that's when it happened. It was like a volcano with the lava of God's presence pouring all around us. There's no way to describe God's glory. We've heard stories about when Moses wanted to see God's glory and God said he couldn't see it and live. And we know about the glory settling on the mountain and then settling on the tabernacle and then settling on the temple. You read about it and sing songs about God's glory as if it's a warm fuzzy that you want to feel. But when God's glory, God's real glory shows up, there's only one position that you can take: on your face. When the purity of God's nature breaks into your world, you're instantly aware of how holy He is and how unholy you are. In that moment, there's nothing else, nothing. In that moment, you realize what life really is, and at the same time, you feel that the weight of it could crush you to death. The light is so intense. It felt like you could look into eternity, and at the same time, it felt that if you did, it would somehow blind you forever. We knew the stories. When the angel of the Lord shows up, he needs no introduction. You could feel the aroma of God as if he just left his presence. And we felt like panic of this scene would sometimes would in some way cause our hearts to explode. And maybe it kind of did. And then he spoke and he put sound to the lava of God's presence. And here's what he said: "Don't be afraid. I've come to bring you good news, the most joyous news the world has ever heard. And it is for everyone, everywhere. For today in Bethlehem, a rescuer has been born to you. He is the Lord Yahweh, the Messiah. You will recognize them by this miraculous sign. You will find a baby wrapped in strips of cloth, lying in a feeding trough. And then the story got even crazier. Now instead of one angel, there were countless angels, and they were singing. It sounded like they'd been rehearsing this moment for thousands of years. What was really interesting is that the message of God's plan for salvation, what the angel announced, caused spontaneous praise to happen. It's almost like all the moments of history were pointing to this single song. The message of the Messiah resulted in praise. It just has to. Glory to God in the highest realms of heaven, for there is peace and good hope given to the sons of men. And we don't know how many times they sang the song or how long it lasted. Singing is part of our culture. We sing at every celebration. We sing on the way to the celebration. We sing on the way back from the celebrations. I've heard a lot of singing, but I've never heard harmony like that. And then it was gone, all of it. No light, no angel, no choir, just a message delivered to us. And then it was silent. I've never heard such quiet. Even the sheep were quiet. The only thing you could hear was your own heartbeat. I don't know how long we stared at the sky. It felt like hours. I'm sure it was just a few seconds. We slowly took our eyes off from the sky and looked at each other. And eyes wide with shock grew into smiles, and smiles morphed into laughter. And laughter surrendered into shouting. Judah, the oldest shepherd, still shining from the glory dust that fell on him, started dancing and singing, "It's finally happening! It's finally happening!" We tried singing the song the angels sing, and let's just say it wasn't angelic, but somehow the words were just ours. Glory to God in the highest realms of heaven, for there is peace and good hope given to the sons of man. Glory to God and peace and hope to us. Somehow the whole story made sense. Somehow through our history, we never learned that when we stop giving glory to God, we sacrifice peace and hope. In our celebration and awe, we didn't notice that Judah was dancing his way down to the path to the city, and we called out, "Judah, where are you going?" And he sang back, "I'm going to see with my own eyes. It's finally happening." And we all ran after him, and we joined him in his song. We didn't go looking for a palace. We would never be allowed in there. And we didn't go looking for a big home with people celebrating. We'd never make our way through that crowd. Our clue was lying in a feeding trough. That we know how to find. We made our way to a small cave with the glow of a fire burning in it. And we knew that we were about to look at God's glory. Not the bright flashing lightning, not the heavy cloud that you're afraid to go near in case you never come out. Not with bright lights, and not with choirs singing loud with celebration. We saw the glory of God wrapped in cloths and lying in a feeding trough. And we thought about the lamb we had just wrapped, born to die. God's glory as it was meant to be, in a baby and in human. There was no fear to enter, but there was awe. That's what we saw, and that's what we lived. The Lamb lived and died, and the Lamb lives again. And no matter what you're going through, I remind you, David, to give glory to God and receive peace and hope. Because that's what the story is really about. The story needs to be told. And when it is told, it needs to be told with wonder. Merry Christmas.